as I was saying, all right. I have forgot, I don't even know what part this is anymore, all right? It's the second one today. I think it's about the 54th, is it? Somewhere around the 54th overall. Of varying lengths, but that was a full half-hour presentation. Trying to give you your money's worth. Speaking of which, we can accept, and we need, whatever non-tax deductible financial gifts you can offer. Be greatly appreciated. Now, as Michael Kenny, Dr. Michael Kenny explained in his book, No God Next Door, about Calles, excuse me, 100 years later. Calles found it politic then to keep the American sects on his side. Always, the Mexican leaders wanted to keep the American lodges on the side of the revolution in Mexico, the anti-clericalism of Mexico. Notorious for affording friendly facilities to Protestant proselytizers and frequently supplying them with temples and institutions of the Catholic, of the church, that is, they would appropriate to take away the property of the church, like the Conciliar Revolutionaries have done. The Americans in the Philippines took over Catholic churches there, and in some instances, and then established Protestant churches without taking over Catholic churches, established Masonic lodges. Oh yes, the American liberation of the Philippines. What a great thing that was, huh? And the war against the indigenous Filipinos who resisted the Americans. The brutal Americans, the bloodthirsty Americans. Ah, liberty, yes indeed. Calles won enthusiastic support, Dr. Kenny noted, from the Baptist and Methodist and Protestant Alliance, an anti-saloon league, and the then pervasive in the 1920s, teens and 20s Ku Klux Klan. It may be noted here that the Methodist Convention at Birmingham, December 1933, acclaimed a resolution commending the Daniels defense of Mexico's religious persecutors, though they have lost the political control of their membership that Mr. Daniels' friend, Bishop Kent, once exercised, the Methodist. And the more effectual aid to crush resistance, Calles, of course, as you know, some of you may know, on June 14th, 1926, issued supplementary decrees to make sure to enforce the 1917 Constitution, that no religious institution may exist, no religious service may be held in the family or home, and within the tolerated churches no priest may function except as the state permits, and in the manner, measure, time, places, and numbers the state prescribes. We're headed in that direction under Obama. And it doesn't make any difference who's going to follow him. The state means to control religion, and it will one day. It must, prior to Antichrist. Antichrist will abolish all false religions. Every one of them will be abolished. There'll be the ultimate battle between Antichrist and Christ the King, in the person, many believe, and I believe it as well, of a true French king, who will rise up, battle, and slay Antichrist. But all of this is a preparation for the coming of the Antichrist. This is all a prefiguring of Antichrist, every single bit of it. It happened in Spain, it happened in Russia, happened in China, happened in Vietnam, in Cuba, happened, as we've noted, Germany, in Italy, happened in France, England, Catholic England, Ireland, the Benelux nations, the Low Countries, but are now the Benelux nations, Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg. Eastern Europe, imposed by force. Central Europe, imposed by force. Mohammedan hordes, North Africa, the 7th century, into Spain. Parts of France, they tried. It's always the same. aided effectively by the Moronas, he had these decrees, cahiers, executed with a brutal relentlessness that spared neither sex nor sanctuary nor cloister, and persons as well as seizable property were ravished. Then something new happened in Mexico. Living under the sword or the threat for a century, bishop and clergy had come to accept persecution without protest and welcomed the slightest toleration as a gift. That's distinctly Mexican. It's courageous in its own way, but it's distinctly Mexican to accept the persecution. But there comes a time when the life of the faith is threatened, that a bishop needs to stand up and to say no and to call evil by its proper name. You either call the darkness by its name or you enter into it. This is what we've done in this country. We've entered into the darkness of Americanism. And so few, even traditional clergy, understand that. Because we are suffering the consequences of the false ideas of the founder. But in 1926, Bishop, this is Michael Kenny, Bishop Jose de Jesus Manriquez of Huejutla, and I can't pronounce that, Huejutla, issued a pastoral that was unique in Mexican elocutions, painting the outrages on human rights that the cahiers hyper-Jacobism inflicts on the suicide which the church's submission to state license for every act of ministry and worship and even of expression had involved. Bishop Manriquez summoned priests and people to defend their rights against this fury of outrage on their faith in manhood. Their failure therein was the source of their calamities. Not only was it an obvious lie that the church had played politics, it was their culpable omission to take civic action on the principles and the problems of good government for the welfare of their people that had brought on them God's anger, of which their persecutors are but the instruments. The same thing here. The American bishops, the true American bishops of yore, for the most part, with some exceptions, were the patsies, the water boys, the errand boys, for one anti-Catholic American president after another, particularly for the likes of William McKinley and Theodore Roosevelt. And Woodrow Wilson, John Calvin Coolidge, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Harry Truman, and their successors in the counterfeit church of conciliarism have, by omission, refused to discipline those Catholics in public life, whether they have been legislators, administrators, civil servants, executives, judges, administrative judges, public officials, spokesmen of any type, commentators. They have refused to discipline those who support and make possible the daily slaughter of the preborn by chemical and surgical means. And now that has emboldened the forces of darkness to support one of the other sins that cry out to heaven for vengeance, the sin of Sodom, as a civil right, in the name of human dignity and equality, marriage equality. All manner of slogan, and many Catholics knuckle under to this, refusing because it's going to hurt their business. They're not going to speak out. They want to be charitable. The way to be charitable is to correct the sinner in love and to say, look, until you convert, I'm not going to permit you to bring your demons around where we are. Our Lord met with sinners, but not simply to reaffirm them in their sins by acts of omission, to convert them, to exhort them to penance. As I've explained to you before, our Lord did not say to St. Mary Magdalene, I know you're weak, I want to be charitable to you, I don't want to hurt your feelings, I want you to come back, I don't want to lose you. Just be grateful you haven't been stoned. He said, what? Go and sin no more. Any bishop, true or false, any Catholic, no matter where that Catholic is, along the vast expanse of the ecclesiastical divide, who by sins of omission refuse to call sin by its proper name and to exhort sinners to convert, who no less give their approval to cohabitation, whether natural or unnatural, are not Catholics. They are as much as enemies of Christ the King as the Talmudists, as the Masons, as the revolutionaries of modernity, and as the lords of conciliarism. I condemn no one. My word, I'm a sinner. But I'm talking about the fact people wrap themselves in a mantle of charity, sanctimonious charity, to avoid what true charity is. To exhort sinners to reform and to choose Christ rather than their companionship. Because by rejecting their companionship now, while they persist in sin unrepentantly, your prayers, your sacrifices, all of the misunderstanding you might suffer, if offered to Our Lady with a pure intention, could be given to the throne of God to effect their conversion in cooperation with the graces that won for us in Calvary by the shedding of every single drop of our Lord's most precious blood on the wood of the Holy Cross, and flow into our souls through the loving hands of Our Lady, she who is the mediatrix of all graces. This is called Catholicism, not empty sentimentality of Protestantism and Judeo-Masonry, of Americanism, emotionalism, the charismatic movement, of yoga. Oh, I feel good. I feel energized. We're energized by the cross. We're vivified by sanctifying grace. Nothing else. Anyone who believes otherwise is deluding themselves, especially a Catholic. Calles, however, was simply the result of 90 to 100 years of American support of anti-clericalism in Mexico. Although I want to make this point to give you some background to understand what happened in Mexico in the 20th century was the result of American policy and of the indifference of many Catholics. Sure, most of them didn't know about it. They had their own battles to take care of here. Fine. As they were accommodating themselves to the American way in order to get along. They had to overcome prejudice, they had to overcome bigotry, and sometimes violence. But once they did that, once they had made it, once they became upwardly mobile, they had their Mass, they had their devotions, they saved their souls as a result of the true sacraments, fine. But they were deaf and dumb and blind to the evil being spread by this country. This country was idolized from the pulpit, even though it was spreading evil and attacking the faith in Mexico and around the world. Although the Constitution of the United States, as I have explained on many different occasions, is officially neutral towards religion, even many of the men who framed the Constitution of America had a great contempt for the Catholic faith, as I've explained, tolerating Catholics in the belief that they would be converted in time to their new science of politics, a hope that has been fulfilled. And if you haven't read my book, my e-book, Conversion in Reverse, which I would hope to put into print on demand format, but I would need funding for formatting of that and for uploading. It costs money. I've lost all major funding. We're down to about 32 disposable dollars now. We pray every day that someone's going to respond. The people were very good to us at Christmas time. That made it possible for us to pay bills then, but the bills come in. We need your help. Non-tax deductible financial gifts that carry no benefit to the donor, but no tax liability for the recipient, no tax liability for either, are needed. That's a good book. I want to do volumes 2 and 3. but I need the subsidy to do that. By the middle of the 19th century in this country, anti-clericalism was being spread by fallen away Catholics from abroad, especially the Carbonari. The Carbonari were numerous in America in the 1840s and 50s, and they received their orders direct from European lodges, and this influenced the situation in Mexico, as you will see. They edited a newspaper, L'Echo d'Italia, and labored unceasingly to prejudice the people against the church and trample the authority of the bishops. In the hope of recovering their waning influence, the Protestant ministers made common cause with these former fallen away anti-Catholic revolutionaries. This was the beginning of a vast conspiracy which imperiled for a time Catholic liberty, so-called. This is from a book written, I believe, about Father Pierre John Semet or this was Robert Leckey's book. Yeah, Robert Leckey's book, Catholic and American, or American and Catholic. And burning of liberty. Well, that liberty wasn't so great to begin with. The Know-Nothings, a new society, began to be organized around 1852. This was a secret order which bound its members by a solemn oath. It was formed ostensibly to defend the rights of the poor against European invasion, meaning Catholics coming here and taking their faith seriously. The Know-Nothings, as well as the Protestants who secretly supported, or at least were rooting for the Know-Nothings, understood what a Catholic ought to be. A Catholic ought to be about the conversion of people to the true faith. They knew that better than the Catholics did. They know it today, which is why they're so fearful. They know that should be the job description of a Catholic. That's our baptismal mandate. To seek the conversion of others, starting with ourselves on a daily basis in cooperation with grace. The Catholics of Cambridge wanted to be accepted, for the most part, with some exceptions. America is for Americans was its slogan. With this object in view, they endeavored to have severe naturalization laws enacted against the new arrivals from Europe, the people who had come from Italy, from Ireland earlier in the 19th century, and then obviously those who were coming as a result of the upheavals in Central Europe starting in 1848, those who would come after the war between the states, and from Southern and Eastern Europe, especially in the wake of the Risorgimento and the Culture Camp, and the growth of the post-war between the states industrial revolution, the War of Northern Aggression. And so in reality, these fanatics, that is the Know-Nothings, combated not so much the foreign immigration as the fidelity of Europeans, especially the Irish, to the Church of Rome. That's what public schooling was designed to attack from the beginning, as I think I've explained to you. It was from the very beginning designed to attack the faith. To base calumnies, they added murder, pillage, incendiarism, and before long found an occasion for opening the campaign. In the spring of 1853, the papal nuncio to Brazil, Archbishop Bedini, arrived in New York, bringing the sovereign pontiff's blessing to the faithful in the United States, Pope Pius IX. He was charged, moreover, to investigate the conditions of Catholicism in the Great Republic. The Know-Nothings saw in this mission a grave attack upon American liberties. Their newspapers denounced the perfidious and ambitious intrigues of Rome. The apostate priest named Gavazzi came from London and placed his eloquence at the service of his fellow socialists and friends. For several months he followed the envoy from one city to the other, vomiting forth lies, threatening him with dire reprisals, and through fiery denunciation endeavored to stir up the masses against the papists. From vituperation and abuse there was but one step to action. Christmas Day in Cincinnati, Ohio, which is near where I find myself at the present time, a band in God's providence, New York exile in the Cincinnati area, a band of assassins attempted to do away with the nuncio. Driven off by the police, they revenged themselves by burning him in effigy. This odious scene was enacted in several towns. Conditions pointing to renewed attacks, Archbishop Bedini was forced to depart after a short sojourn in the United States. But the hostilities did not cease with the departure of the nuncio. The campaign lasted for 3 years, attended by violent outrages and attacks, and armed forces had presently to interfere to defend life and property. A witness of these disorders, Father de Semet, draws a gloomy picture of existing conditions in his letters. The times are becoming terrible for Catholics in these unhappy states. Nowhere in the world do honest men enjoy less liberty. And that's from the book of the life of Father Pierre John de Semet. And of course, such attacks were not uncommon in the 19th century in the supposedly free and civilized United States of America. Anti-clerical and anti-Catholic legislation was common in some of the more progressive states in the progressive era in the latter part of the 19th and early part of the 20th centuries. The current administration of President Barack Hussein Obama, Barry Soetoro, and Vice President Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. is demonstrating this once again, albeit with the public support of millions upon millions of Catholics who, much like Biden himself, have continued in good standing in what they think is the Catholic Church, even though they have practiced contraception and are fully supportive of the surgical assassination of innocent preborn children. History does repeat itself, and it must, when Christ is not king of men and their nations. The Blaine Amendments, named after the virulently anti-Catholic James G. Blaine, who in addition to being the Republican Party nominee for President of the United States of America in 1884, served in the United States House of Representatives and the United States Senate, and served 2 different terms in 2 different presidencies as the United States Secretary of State. The Blaine Amendments that were passed by many state legislatures, including that of my own native state of New York, prohibited the use of public funding of any kind to subsidize schools operated by religious organizations. Members of the Grand Orient Lodge of Oregon, using all of their considerable clout, joined forces with their great ally, the Ku Klux Klan, and others to sponsor an initiative, a referendum approved by the people, to amend the Compulsory Education Act, in effect to outlaw Catholic schools in the state of Oregon by mandating that all children be educated in public schools. This effort was rendered unconstitutional by the Supreme Court of the United States in the case of Pierce versus Society of Sisters, June 1st, 1925, although in that case it did say the state could compel education in schools. Even though it said the children were not the mere creatures of the state, the court also said the state could compel education in schools. The state is not the principal educator of children. Parents, according to the natural law, the precepts of the 4th commandment, are the principal educators of the children, not the civil state, not the non-education association, the NEA. Not Obama, not the bureaucrats, not the so-called educational schools, colleges, universities, not the educational corporations, many of the textbook publishers who established the agenda. It's the parents, governed, guided by Holy Mother Church. The state of North Dakota, long a den of Masonic activity. So I'm trying to explain here how in the 19th century in the United States, there were similar anti-clerical measures taking place here as there were in Mexico. And in the next presentation I'm going to go into how, while all of this was going on in this country, American policymakers were attempting to undermine, to influence events in Mexico. The state of North Dakota, long a den of Masonic activity. Freemasons in the newly formed state legislature in 1889 start to liberalize existing divorce laws as a means of destabilizing the family, something that was fought by the founding bishop of the Diocese of Jamestown, now the Diocese of Fargo, North Dakota, John Shanley, passed an anti-garb law in 1847 to require priests and consecrated religious to wear lay clothing when teaching in public schools, what was permitted at that time. The Freemasons of North Dakota hoped to force a crisis of conscience for priests and religious that would prompt the 2 bishops of North Dakota from prohibiting their clergy and religious to teach in public schools. Bishops Leo Dworshak of Fargo and Vincent Ryan of Bismarck got permission from the Holy See for the clergy and the religious to wear lay clothing, thereby avoiding that crisis of conscience. And a history of Bishop Vincent Ryan notes as follows. When the anti-garb campaign was waged in North Dakota in 1948, Bishop Ryan led in the defense of the rights of those wearing religious garb to teach in public schools and of the state. The opposition was well organized and had carried on vigorous campaigning before the Catholics of the state were aware of its activities. Bishop Ryan rose to the challenge, and his efforts to defeat this measure were very nearly successful. In conjunction with Bishop Leo Dworshak of the Fargo Diocese, he appealed to the Holy See for permission for the sisters to teach in lay clothing. The victory for the anti-Catholics and the bigots was rendered empty when the Holy See granted the request. Friends and enemies alike had a new admiration for Bishop Ryan following this campaign. Should they have done that? Well, that's another matter, but they did. I remember speaking when I was working as the Director of Communications for the Conciliar Bishop of Fargo, Bishop James Stephen Sullivan, now dead. He wasn't a bishop. And one of the sisters there told me of her great sorrow of having to take off her habit, which she had worn for many years, to teach in public schools. I think that was in southern North Dakota, near the South Dakota border, I believe. I was told this. It's a heartbreaking story. A heartbreaking story. The free United States of America, not so. States' rights, not so. No state has the right to mandate this. You'll see, there's quite a kinship between the anti-clerical activity in this country and that in Mexico, which was funded and supported, and in some cases armed, by the United States of America. As I think I may have indicated before, the authors of the Texas Declaration of Independence enshrined their hatred of the holy priesthood as an instrument of eternal tyranny. I'm going to check on the time. I'll do this and then we'll pick it up. When the federal constitution of their country, meaning Mexico, which they have sworn to support, no longer has a substantial existence, and the whole nature of their government has been forcibly changed without their consent from a restrictive federative republic composed of sovereign states to a consolidated central military despotism in which every interest is disregarded but that of the army and the priesthood, both the eternal enemies of civil liberty, the army and the priesthood, the ever-ready minions of power, and the usual instruments of tyranny. Ladies and gentlemen, the United States of America has long been a den of anti-Catholicism. And while Catholics gave thanks they were in a free country, the veneer of freedom was being used to attack the faith here and around the world. As I think we're running out of time, I'm going to pick this up in the next presentation, and we'll talk more specifically about the attacks on the faith in Mexico during the 20th century. And there was a lot that I've gone into in my 5-part series. No need to repeat all of that, obviously, but I wanted to provide the flavor for those of you who have not yet read that, so that A, you will read it, and number 2, for those who haven't read it, and for those who have, provide a framework to understand the conciliar revolution represents an official reconciliation with these falsehoods. Viva Cristo Rey, Viva la Virgen de Guadalupe. Keep praying your rosaries. I'll get back to you in a moment. Thank you.